talk and debate on the economy. At the end of it, what did we learn about the parties and their positions? And did anything happen to break the logjam between the three main parties? Andrew is here in Toronto tonight. Chantal is in Montreal. Bruce is in Ottawa. Some kind of quick general assessments from each of you on what you witnessed tonight before we break it down. Andrew?
I think it was a very good night for Mr. Harper, first off. It's subject matter he's comfortable with. He was very relaxed, very conversant, was able to make warnings about his opponents without sounding shrill. I thought Mr. Mulcair had a mixed night, some of the best lines of the night, but maybe some of the worst moments, a tendency to be too clever by half sometimes. Mr. Trudeau, this is not subject matter he's comfortable with, and you could see it. He was much more, had the feeling of rehearsing his lines, shouted way too much, intervened way too much. I'm not sure he did his cause much good tonight.
Chantal?
As I sit here, I hear my Francophone colleagues saying that Justin Trudeau had a really good night. So, and I'm not saying that they are right or Andrew is wrong, but I believe that this debate will not break the deadlock there, that there is enough conflicting ways to look at it that you could find what you like about any of them. They had very different strategies. I think all of them managed to execute most of that strategy, and I don't think we're going to see one of them breaking away from the pack as a result of this debate.
Bruce?
I found myself thinking we're really at the beginning of an election campaign, and we've got three leaders who really know what it is that they want to sell now and are actually getting better at selling it. I do think that Mr. Harper improved his pitch a little bit, but I still think instead of being kind of 90% saying things are good and they don't need to change very much, he was more like 70% there, so improvement for him. I thought Mr. Mulcair had a somewhat better night than he had. And for Mr. Trudeau, for me, it's a little bit hard to say. I do think that he established that he was the one who had the kind of the most urgent idea of change, and that we really need to get on with change, and the other two seemed not quite so persistent in that. Whether that comes off as too aggressive for some or just the right tone for others, I think it's too early to tell.
Like that?
That's the winner.
I couldn't resist. The bell was the...
Yes.
I was wondering what happened to tricycle bells, and we found out tonight. Okay, let me break it down and show a couple of clips. I'm going to start with one that, isn't directly linked to the economy subject, but it was one of the issues that's come up a lot in the last couple of weeks of this campaign, and that has been the refugee issue, and you can make a link to the economy, as some have tried throughout this debate tonight. But I want to show you this exchange that happened. It's what we're going to show you starts with Mr. Trudeau, but it's in response to something Stephen Harper said about the fact that he's the only one who stands up to dictators. Watch this.
He likes to talk about standing up against tyrants and dictators and against terrorists, but you know who stand up against dictators and terrorists? Families fighting to keep their family together, hoping for a better life for them.
Mr. Harper, unfortunately, and it's undignified, is fear-mongering. Mr. Harper, why don't you stop using the security excuse as a pretext to do nothing?
Mr.
Because
Mulcair,
nobody wants to let somebody in without a security check, but you're doing nothing.
These guys would have had, in the last 2 weeks, us throwing open our borders and literally hundreds of thousands of people coming without any kind of security check or documentation.
And that's
some other
not
countries
true,
have
Mr.
done.
Harper.
That would have been an enormous mistake.
See,
we're following a balanced approach. We're bringing more refugees.
Fears, all the time.
We're providing
fears
more
of
humanitarian
others,
support.
fears of different communities.
And we're taking
we have a
on
prime minister who prefers to pander to fears.
All right. Well, you saw what happened a number of times during the debate. It almost basically got out of hand with everybody talking over each other, but you saw the general thrust of that issue. Chantal, on that one.
It wasn't a really high point in the life of a prime minister, this assertion that hundreds of thousands of refugees would have stormed in Canada if someone else had been prime minister. It was kind of a strange positioning. Whether there are points to be had by the Conservative leader on the stand with that assertion and this playing on the notion that you don't want to open wide the doors to Syrian refugees, you need to be really careful about them, remains to be seen. But it was quite a bold assertion on the part of the Prime Minister and groundless.
All right. Next issue is directly linked to the economy for sure. It's the issue of pipelines. Something we haven't heard a lot about through the campaign, but perhaps because it was in Calgary, although if you'd been watching, you might have wondered if it was really in Calgary because all the backgrounds were Ottawa, the Parliament buildings. But nevertheless, the issue is pipelines, And it started with, who did it start with tonight? It starts with Stephen Harper. Watch this, his pitch on pipeline.
And that sector needs a government that is on its side. We want to see this sector grow and develop.
The problem is, Mr. Walmsley, under
know,
Stephen Harper's stewardship, we have not built 1 kilometre of pipeline to Tidewater, and it's easy to understand why. He's gutted a whole series of environmental laws. We don't have a credible, thorough environmental assessment process left in this country. The public is not on side. He thought he was helping the energy companies by destroying that legislation. He's actually made their lives tougher.
Mr. Mulcair, you actually are the only leader in Canadian history to have gone to another country, you and your colleagues, to the United States, to argue against Canadian jobs and against Canadian development projects.
It's exactly the opposite, Mr. Harper. It's exactly the opposite.
He talks about being the best friend that Calgary has ever had, that Alberta has ever had, but he hasn't gotten pipelines built. He has made the oil sands an international pariah, and with friends like Stephen Harper, Alberta doesn't need enemies.
All right, Bruce, you spent a lot of time on the energy file, being in Alberta quite often. What did you make of that exchange?
Well, this is one of those economic issues that I wish had actually gotten a little bit more exploration in the course of this debate. I don't think that, I was surprised that neither Mr. Harper nor Mr. Trudeau went at Mr. Mulcair to either associate himself or distance himself from the LEAP manifesto, which came out earlier in the week, which has a lot of people who are normally associated with the NDP signing a document that really has a kind of an anti-development feel. At least to many eyes, I think it would be seen as an anti-development idea. So I think the time is ripe to have that discussion. I think Mr. Mulcair was probably prepared to have to answer hard questions about it, but it didn't seem to me as much a focal point as it could have been. And we were stuck in this debate about Mr. Harper's an advocate for pipelines, and his opponents saying, well, you may be in principle, but in practice you haven't been able to get much done. We've heard that line before.
All right, Andrew, I want you to handle this next one, and it's the argument the three of them had around the issue of the deficit. Watch this.
Mr. Harper, you have run deficits in good years. You have run deficits in bad years. The only time you've said the deficits are not going to be run is in election years.
Why would we return to deficits now when we have an unstable global economy and we need to make sure we can assure people that the benefits are delivering?
Mr. Mulcair, please. Now, you just heard him say the same thing. He was clearly criticizing the fact that Mr. Harper had run deficits, but that's exactly what he's planning to do. So I think, Justin, that it's only fair to say that when your advisors tell you one thing and another and they're totally contradictory, pick one. You just can't say them both.
All right, Andrew?
I think that was the closest thing to the fabled knockout blow in the debate tonight. There is a basic incoherence in the Liberal position on this, and he was certainly ruthless in exploiting that. I think, this is a crux issue for a couple of reasons. One is Harper. The polls show that Harper is trusted most on the budget management. He does not do so well on the economy these days. He's got to somehow make the connection between managing the budget carefully and being better for the economy. You certainly saw him working on that very carefully. The other thing that's interesting is on this debate, you kind of see the NDP in the middle between the two parties. The Liberals' unique selling proposition is we're the only party that will run deficits. The Tories is we're the only party that won't raise taxes. And the NDP are sort of in the middle, a little bit of both, saying we'll balance budgets like the Tories, but we'll raise taxes like the Liberals. That's an unusual position for them to find themselves in.
All right. One of the party leaders, the Green Party leader, Elizabeth May, was not offered a spot on the stage, but that didn't stop her, and you got to give her marks for finding a way to get in on the debate. She was tweeting video responses to the questions as they came up throughout the evening. We'll show you one, and this was on Mr. Harper's claim that this government had reduced greenhouse gas emissions in Canada more than anyone else had. Watch this response.
For Mr. Harper to take credit for the drop in Canadian emissions, which occurred in 2008-2009, I think he'd have to take credit for the global financial crisis. That's the only reason our emissions went down then, and ever since then they have been rising in the absence of any plan.
All right, not a bad response, and she gets herself in on the debate, even though she wasn't there in Calgary. Okay, let's step back now in terms of what has happened tonight and what impact it may or may not have. Mr. Mulcair has been leading in most of the polls, and in the overview of the polls would suggest he is ahead. Now, to stay ahead, he has to take votes away from the Conservatives and the Liberals. Did he do anything tonight that would damage the votes he's got or increase the potential for more votes? Chantal.
I don't think he necessarily lost votes tonight, and he probably did not make himself a choice that more people will say they can't make. But beyond that, I think he needed weaker performance from both his opponents, but in particular Justin Trudeau, to really score.
Bruce?
Yeah, I think Mr. Mulcair's, the stakes for Mr. Mulcair right now really come down to the fight between his party and the Liberal Party in the province of Ontario. That's going to clarify pretty, well, I don't know, pretty soon. It will clarify at some point whether we're headed for a complete deadlock or one of the opposition parties is going to break away. I don't think Mr. Mulcair hurt himself tonight. I'm not sure if he helped himself. I think in his costing package out yesterday, I don't think that was a great day for the NDP, and I don't think the LEAP manifesto was a great day for the NDP. So he had a good debate tonight, but a bad week overall.
Andrew, you were bullish on Harper's performance in the debate. Do you think he drew any of those votes that he's lost over the last little while back into his fold?
He might have a few people who, I mean, every time he comes out in these things and he's not the sort of scowling, angry, secretive, he's actually can be quite presentable in these things. And I think, for voters who were sort of fed up with that persona, looking at it afresh, they might have been reassured, some of them might have gone, but I wouldn't think a whole number would. I think Mulcair's problem was that I think would have done quite well tonight in terms of taking votes away from Harper, but the big fight for him right now is with the Liberals. And I said I didn't think Justin Trudeau did very well in terms of the shouting, et cetera. But it may be that the voters he's going after are not looking for somebody who's necessarily knowledgeable about the economy, but somebody who's angry about the economy. And if he was capturing that mood, he may have done some more favors than I might have anticipated.
Well, it is the big question. What is going to happen? Will that logjam between those two parties, the NDP and the Liberals, is it ever going to be broken? And what is needed for it to be broken? None of you seem to be suggesting there's any reason to think that logjam was broken tonight. If it wasn't, what could break it? Bruce?
Well, I think that Mr. Trudeau is saying to those soft NDP supporters that if you believe that you need growth in this economy, Mr. Mulcair won't give it to you. I will give it to you. And he's really trying hard to exploit what he sees as a policy advantage over the NDP leader. And I think that if I look at the polls in Ontario, I would say over the last couple of weeks, it does look to me like the Liberals have opened up a bit of an advantage over the NDP. And maybe in that sense, Mr. Trudeau was doing something really quite strategic towards that audience tonight.
Chantal?
I think, set aside tonight's debate, I think Justin Trudeau has made it easier for people who are progressive and leftist to think that they could vote Liberal than might have been the case. And that is probably why he's doing better in Ontario at this point. Not only because he can pry votes off the NDP if in the end people conclude that Mr. Mulcair won't go the distance, but because a lot of people are comfortable with the Liberal brand, so they will take more of a chance on him than they would if he were, with his platform, the leader of the NDP. So I don't have the answer to how the logjam gets broken, though.
Andrew?
Neither do I. I'll just say this was not a great issue generally for the NDP. Mulcair's real task tonight was to limit the damage. If you look again at the polling data, people give points to the Conservatives on some issues of the economy. They give points to the Liberals on some others. They don't tend to give points to the NDP on this issue. I think he succeeded in that sense of preventing any kind of real damage to himself today, and he can hope to move it on to some other issues again to try and wedge votes away from the Liberals. C51, you heard him bringing that up in the middle of a debate on the economy.
All right. We're going to leave it at that for tonight. Another debate coming up in the not too distant future, so we'll see whether, if there is a logjam breaker, that one is it. If not, I still think that we're probably into this situation until Thanksgiving, when people really start getting close and start talking to neighbor, family to family. Thank you all. Bruce in Ottawa, Chantal in Montreal, Andrew here in Toronto.